going on, Bucs fans? Welcome inside the 813 every week. Rock and I are coming at you with our studs and duds, our X Factors, and of course, you know we got to talk about Todd. I am James Yarcho, your host, editor-in-chief at the 813, joined by our boots on the ground, the one, the only Rock Riley. Of course, check out all the content we have for you here at the 813.tv and follow on Twitter at the 813TV, at JYarcho_Bucs, and at Real Rock Riley. Rock, how are we doing on this this short week?
I'm doing fine because I didn't have to play in an NFL game on Sunday in 105-degree heat. They announced it in the press box. There were Eagles fans that were dropping. Yaya Diaby said that he looked across and he saw an Eagles player that was wheezing. And then they have to come back and get their bodies ready. Fans don't see what they have to do on such a short week. But all in all, when they came out on Thursday, they were kind of like dancing and hollering a little bit. And I said, you know what? They are ready and I'm ready, even though it's a short week. Bring on the Thursday night game, James.
Yeah, it kind of reminded me with the way they were talking about the heat and everything on the broadcast. It reminded me of that game against the Eagles when McNabb was puking on the sidelines because he was so overheated and dehydrated. Man, that was a fun game because that was the Rondé double pick six and then the Matt Bryant 60, was it a 62-yard field goal
It was
that
60 something.
won
Yep.
the game. But yeah, McNabb over there just losing his lunch on the sidelines because he was so overheated. So, Aaron Andrews was talking about Baker Mayfield, changing his pants at halftime, and Brady in the booth talking about how that heat is for real, and he had become acclimated to playing in such cold weather late in the year, and how actually it was the early part in Tampa that was tough to play through, and then it got really nice, towards the end of the season. So that heat is a real thing that teams that aren't used to it, even if you're used to it, it sucks. But when you're not used to it, it's real bad.
That's what Tristan Wirfs was saying. He's like, I moved here year round. And even in the off season, there are hot days, and that's why I do it. And I even got tired out there. So you can be in shape. I always wondered, James, because years ago, some Buccaneer players were telling me that, it's not really an advantage early on because they're so worn out. But I think it is an advantage, and I think it was an advantage for the Bucs against the Eagles. The Eagles did not play good. Bucs played a lot better, but I think there was something to it. I really do.
Yeah, well, no heat advantage this Thursday. But before we turn the page to Thursday's game against the Atlanta Falcons, let's talk about this week's studs and duds. And there were a lot to choose from, Rock. Who's your stud this week?
My stud is 34-year-old linebacker Levante David. I didn't know if he was even going to come back. I remember at the end, it was the last time we were in the locker room. He was saying goodbye. He's like, I don't know. I don't know. Then he talked to the trainer, and I remember the trainer was saying, you still got it, Levante. Do you really want to reach it? You still got it. And then he started thinking about it. He said, you know what? I'm going to come back for one more year. And Father Time has not caught up to him. 1,500 tackles. Look at what he did. I think this was possibly his best game. Look at the strip sack, the play that he made. He also got in their faces last week. And he told one of the reporters, Lee was asking him about it. He goes, did you speak up, man? And he goes, somebody had to do it. Yep, it was time for me to do it. And I was glad that he actually did do that. So for me, 34-year-old and 34 years old are not in that heat. Levante David is my stud of that game.
Yeah, I agree 100%. In fact, you and I were talking before we started recording that Levante was also going to be my stud. You got to him first, and I agree 100%. Team high 8 tackles. You mentioned the sacks. You mentioned the forced fumble. Joins Derek Brooks as the only players in team history to reach 1,500 tackles. But then he's the highest rated player from Pro Football Focus for the Buccaneers in Week 4 with a 90.4. And I mentioned him as my X Factor on last week's episode, and I said, he has to be the one to set the tone. You cannot let Saquon Barkley run all over this team like he has in the Eagles' wins this year. And it stays the truth. If Barkley has over 100 rushing yards, the Eagles win. Under 100, they lose. Levante set the tone from the opening drive. He tackled Saquon for no gain. Then he takes down Goddard immediately after a reception to force the 3 and out. Didn't give up any yards after catch. That hot start is what got the Bucs going, and it was because of back-to-back Levante David plays. It was vintage Levante. You said he's 34. I don't believe you. He's 24. He's still playing like he's 24, and the Bucs are going to have him for the next decade. But they're definitely going to need that Levante again this week against Atlanta. I'll talk more about that a little bit later. My stud, it had to be Baker Mayfield, right? If it wasn't Levante, it's Baker Mayfield. 30 for 47, 347, 2 touchdowns in the air. He had the rushing touchdown, and his stat line is so much better without the drops. If it wasn't for all those drops, you're talking about 400 plus yards, at least 3, probably 4 touchdowns. But listen to what Baker's done this year, completing over 70% of his passes. He's 6th in the NFL in yards. He's 2nd in touchdowns, 6th in yards per game, 5th in completions, 4th in quarterback rating, and he has just 2 interceptions on the year. A big part of that is how quickly he was getting rid of the ball on Sunday, and he just let his receivers make plays. 2.05 seconds from snap to pass last week against the Philadelphia Eagles. It was the fastest of his career and the second fastest of any quarterback this season. Baker was on fire. Gonna need that again against the Falcons.
That is a great one because I was even starting to think about Vita Vea, what he meant by being in there. Chase McDaniel, he's got a podcast. He was a 14-year NFL vet. And the other day, and I actually stopped and he had a good point. He's like, MVP right now, quarterbacks. Baker Mayfield is in the top 4. Look at the numbers. Sam Darnold, believe it or not, is having an unbelievable year. You got Josh Allen, but he goes, Baker Mayfield's got to be in consideration for MVP. I mean, we're early, but you are right. Other than that game against Denver that I think everybody was bad, they just seemed off to me. I mean, we can break it down. He has really been consistent, James, and I don't see that dropping off. Baker Mayfield, that's a good one, James.
Yeah, I mean, and let's allow Buccaneers fans a moment here to collectively laugh at the Carolina Panthers. Number 1 in the NFL right now in passing touchdowns is Sam Darnold. Number 2 is Baker Mayfield. Both of those guys were on Carolina's team at the same time, and they chose Bryce Young. Oops. I don't know if the Panthers are the problem, if the Jets are the problem, but apparently quarterbacks go to those 2 franchises to just completely fall off the face of the earth. So everybody have fun at the expense of a Panthers fan today because those 2 quarterbacks have combined for 19 touchdown passes on the season. Rock, my dud in this one, it was hard to find a dud. Everybody
Yes.
played so well in this game, but my dud has to go to wide receiver Cameron Johnson. He was the only player in that game with a target and not a catch. He dropped a sure touchdown in the end zone that started that domino effect of all the pass catchers getting a case of the drops that I mentioned when talking about Baker as my stud. But here you have an undrafted rookie that the Bucs were really, really high on. That's why he made the team. You can't have drops like that. You get the ball like that you catch and cradle for 6 points, and then you drop it when you hit the ground. Can't have it. Luckily, it didn't rear, the consequences of that didn't rear its ugly head. Later in the game, it was a blowout. It didn't get close enough for that to be the major impact, but that would have made it a 21-0 game at that point. Instead, it's 17-0. If you want to be trusted in big-time situations or in the red zone, you have to come down with those passes, and Cameron Johnson just didn't do it.
Liam Cohen was asked about that, and he was like, it happens. His time is going to come again. And he works hard and he doesn't drop in practice. But you're right, James. When you're a guy like that that's just on the cusp of making a team, and it's NFL not for long for a reason. It's so businesslike. I know you go to training camp, and when you go there, you see all these bodies and their names on the back, and you go into a preseason game in a locker room and they put in extra lockers. There's so many. And then they make all their cuts and then they're gone. Just like that. It happens like that. This is the hardest league in the world to play football. So he might not get another chance. I hope he does because he does work hard, but you're right. If it's wide open like that, you got to catch it. So, no, I guess you could call him a dud. For me, I'm going to go with Kenny Britt. It wasn't like it was a really bad game. There was one specific play where Jalen Hurts, I believe it was a 4th and 1, he had him. He could have kept on going, kind of put his hands up, and you could have had him. You could have got him down onto the ground. Be a little bit more aggressive, and Jalen Hurts ended up throwing a pass, and boom, Paris Campbell, and then it was a touchdown. It was one play that stood out. Now, Servassier Dennis, who is now put on the IR, he was kind of breathing down that neck of Kenny Britt. And, I could see if it would have kept going that way, that maybe Britt would lose his starting position. But every time that's brought up to Bowles, he's like, he's a leader. He still calls our plays. We believe in him. He lacks in athleticism compared to some other linebackers at his spot. So it was hard, James. Come on, they blew him out. They played good on both sides of the ball. But if we got to pick a dud, and I was going to almost go with Cam Johnson as well, we must be on the same wavelength, James Yarcho. I'm going to go with Kenny Britt.
Yeah, and like you said, it was so hard because all these players
KJ Britt.
played
I'm
really,
sorry,
really well.
KJ Britt. Yeah.
Um, but we're nitpicking at this point,
Yeah.
right? After a performance like that, we're nitpicking. Some guys have to be the studs, some guys have to be the duds. Not everyone was perfect, but you're right. Servassier Dennis was breathing down Britt's neck, and I remember the play that you're talking about very vividly because it was like Jalen Hurts juked him from 8 yards away just by kind of standing there. And I remember saying to myself at the time, like, you have to continue that pursuit. You have to continue to get after Jalen, at least try to force a bad throw. I don't know if Britt maybe thought that there was a dump off option right behind him. There wasn't some communication going on. But yeah, he kind of stumbles, gives Hurts extra time. He finds Paris Cable for a touchdown. But overall, again, some great football from the Buccaneers on Sunday, and that is in large part thanks to Todd Bowles. And it is time for us to start talking about Todd and Rock. You've been there all week on the short week when they were right back in the facility. What's your big takeaway from Todd Bowles coming out of Sunday's win?
Now, I can just tell. I can tell by being there, and when you're right up close and those questions come to him every day, it's about all the injuries, James. I mean, you look at the list, it's incredible. I think going into last week's game, it was either 19 or 20 players had been on the list this early. So he's
Mhm.
getting these questions, and it's more than just questions, it's going in the back. What do we do? This guy's out. If he can't play, who are we going to put up? We bring in somebody from the practice squad. Is it worth it trying to get somebody off the street or somebody that's just been cut? And if we do, should it be a player, what they tend to do, that already knows our system? We've seen that happen. So, I mean, with that, hey, that's the responsibility of the head coach. But still, I want Todd to continue with the great defensive game plan. They're 3-1. He had one dud. He got out coached. It was not a good job against the Denver Broncos, but the other three games, I think he's done a phenomenal job. He's changed it up. If you look in this game, they're always known as blitzing. They weren't really blitzing a lot early on. And then later in the game, he started blitzing. He also has been doing a great job of disguising coverages. And a lot of the players in the Eagles locker room on offense were saying, the same thing. And there were some things that were coming at, they didn't foresee that on the film. So I know he's got a lot on his plate with all these injured players, but Todd, continue to focus because you are the defensive coordinator. You are a defensive mastermind. Keep with these good schemes, keep putting in just as much time. If you got to get Jason Light and other guys to help you out with the players that are injured, you can have the final say, but that's very, very important for this team. They're not great, They're a solid team defensively and offensively, and you got to keep playing solid.
Yeah, and I'm with you 100%. And I know it stinks that they still don't have Kalijah Cansey back. Antoine Winfield Jr. was the human Falcon killer last year. He's not going to be on the field. We know that, but that doesn't mean that Todd Bowles can't continue to dial up the pressure. Really, it's business as usual, right? They haven't had Cansey all year. They only had Antoine for one game, and he's been able to make it happen even without those key pieces. So you take a look at last week. Jalen Hurts was pressured on 29% of his dropback. He was sacked 6 times. One of them ended up being a forced fumble by Levante. Then you turn and you look at the other birds, the Falcons. They're 0-2 this year when Cousins is pressured on more than 20% of his dropbacks. Against the Steelers, against the Chiefs, Cousins was pressured on 32.1% and 41.9% of his dropbacks. Against the Eagles and Saints, it was 16.1% and 13.9%. He sacked twice in each of the Falcons' losses, sacked once in each of their wins. I don't think it's a coincidence that his average depth of target in those 2 losses were 7.5 yards or lower. And then in the 2 wins, they were 9 yards or higher. So the recipe to beating the Falcons is to make sure that you are keeping the pressure up on Kirk Cousins. That's where Levante David is going to come into play. Do the exact same thing you did against Philadelphia. You remove the carries of Bijan Robinson by playing stout run defense, getting him at or close to the line of scrimmage, not letting him break off those big runs. Now all of a sudden, the game script says the Bucs are ahead. The Falcons have to throw the ball. You pin your ears back and you get after him, because that's how Kirk Cousins has lost this season. Yes, outside of Justin Jefferson, going from the Vikings to the Falcons, outside of that one player, his collective weapons in Atlanta are better. So if you give him time, he can make you pay for it. Get that pressure after him in the backfield, just like you did last week, and the Bucs are going to come out of Atlanta with a win.
You like that? You like that? Now, when he did that, I'm talking about Kirk Cousins.
Oh,
But
yeah.
no, head coach Todd Bowles was saying pretty much the same thing that you were saying, and Bowles is 2-0 against Kirk. Now, Kirk, he did say though, just like you said, he's got better weapons. He had Jefferson in Minnesota, and that was it. So I like it being early in the year. I think he's going to do a good job dialing it up. I really do. I really like their chances. I mentioned this on a report that I had, or maybe my prediction on the 813.tv. Going in, like seeing them on Monday, I'm like, wow, they just had a game. They're out here practicing, even though it's a walkthrough. And then yesterday, which was these days were Tuesday, right? Another practice. I'm like, oh, but then when they came out today, James, on Wednesday, they were looking and feeling pretty good. And I was like, okay, even though it's the short week, I'm feeling pretty good. They were feeling kind of confident, feeling kind of good. So they haven't played a like sloppy games other than that one clunker. You know what I mean? Penalties haven't been that much of a problem this year. Now, when they were bad on tackling, they actually had a emphasis on tackling and did some tackling practice. How about that? A lot of teams don't do that during the season. So Bowles has done a good job so far this year. And those were some good stats you had on how to get to Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, and that'll be the recipe, right? And I was talking to a friend of mine that covers the Atlanta Falcons, and he was talking about how there's apparently this thing called Kirktober, where Kirk Cousins really dials up his play in the month of October. There were a lot of questions about the Falcons, kind of coming into the season. How is he going to come back off of that Achilles injury? How is the offense going to look with an entirely new coaching staff and a new quarterback? Excuse me. They have a month under their belts now. They have 4 games under their belt. They're 2-2, got off to a little bit of a slow start. You have to get after him early, rattle him a little bit like you did in week 1 last year with the Minnesota Vikings. And that way you can dictate the pace of play and escape with a huge upset and a big, big divisional win. They have to face this Falcons team twice over the next 4 weeks. You have to at least split. I think if you get the upset in Atlanta, that's going to set the tone for the home game in just a couple of weeks. 3 divisional games in 4 weeks for this Buccaneers team. You get the Falcons, you get the Saints, then you get the Ravens, then you get the Falcons again. You have to come out of this stretch with at least 2 division wins. And, a win on Thursday night is going to go a real long way for this team. But if they're going to get that win, Rock, we need to talk about the X factors. Who do you look to on this Buccaneers team as your X factor in this one that is going to help the Bucs get a win?
I'm gonna look at it as Bucky Irving. I
Okay.
think I'm telling you, that helps so much. That'll help with play action. I was looking across the field today and I saw Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, and they came out together late, and I was looking at them, I'm like, they're gonna need a big performance by those guys because not only is Jalen McMillan out, Trey Palmer is out as well. So there's a reason why other guys are number 3, number 4. You're the backups. So he's going to have those too, but Raheem Morris. Raheem Morris is a defensive minded guy. Jimmy Lake is a good defensive coordinator. So they're going to have a plan to try to neutralize Godwin and Evans. That means you got to get the push. You got to get somewhat of a running game. And Sean White too, but if it's just one right now, Irving is better than Rashad White. He really is. And so for me, Bucky Irving and the running game, you gotta be pretty solid in this one, man, to help out with the lack of receivers other than the 2 studs.
Yeah, not only that, but if you get that run game going, and maybe it does take kind of what we saw against the Eagles, right? Where Baker was getting the ball out of his hands really quick. A lot of passes on that opening touchdown drive, only one run. It went for 17 yards, but that quick, short passing game is really what got things going. If you need to do that to open up the run game throughout, the rest of the night, then do it. But if you get that run game going, now all of a sudden you are the one who's playing the clock game, right? You are the one that is maintaining possession, having these long, drawn out scoring drives, keeping that Falcons offense on the sideline. And if you can jump out, they really need that opening drive touchdown again. If you can start off with a scoring drive and then the defense can get the ball back quickly, just like we saw against Philadelphia, and you jump out to that 2-score lead early on, that's going to be huge for how the Bucs defense is able to play. Bucky Irving, Rashad White, they are going to be key pieces in that. I love that pick of Bucky Irving. For mine, you might as well just run the tape back from last week. My X factor is Lavonte David. He has to have the kind of game that he had against the Eagles. I talked about his ability to shut down Saquon Barkley. Think about it. Saquon had 10 carries for 84 yards. That's tied for the most rushing yards allowed to a running back by the Buccaneers this year. But one of those carries was 59 yards. So outside of that, you had 9 carries for 25 yards for Saquon Barkley. The Bucs took the ball out of the hands of the Eagles' best player. The same thing applies this week. Take the ball out of the hands of Bijan Robinson and force the Falcons' offense to be one-dimensional and allow the pass rush to get after it. Lavonte is going to have his hands full with Bijan. He's going to have his hands full with Kyle Pitts, but he's also going to be able to pick his spots and be able to get into the backfield and get Kirk Cousins the way he did last week. You're going to have Vita Vea going up against an undersized center that he can really take advantage of. They're going to have to double team him. That opens things up for Yaya Diaby, for Chris Braswell, who has gotten more involved recently. Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, Greg Gaines, Anthony Nelson, all these guys were involved in getting pressure on Jalen Hurts. It has to happen again. Get Kirk uncomfortable. That's going to lead to takeaways by this defense.
I like it. And I was thinking about it like where we are in the season now. Now you start seeing what you are. You're not going to, you can try to fool some people. What are you? And I think that, but I asked this to Baker. And in the locker room, Mike Evans said the same thing after the game when he put on his thing. He even put on his shades, James. He said, "You see my watch?" He was kind of busting chops, but you know what? You can do that. You're a first ballot Hall of Famer. He goes, "You guys are here, win or lose. You're always here." And then, but he said, "Play physical, play physical." come out fast. Baker Mayfield said same thing. Be consistent, play physical, come out fast. He's not trying to fool everybody. And I think that's what they are on offense. And on defense, same thing. If you get your tackling down, you're going to be bringing the blitzes. Bowles is going to take care of that. Again, I think the Buccaneers are like a solid team. And you don't have to worry when I'm looking at these other game plans. And all right, the Falcons on offense, it's a new offensive coordinator. He hasn't really called plays. It was like Canales last year. You got a quarterback coming off an Achilles. He's also new. It's a new head coach. With the Bucs, you don't have that. Baker Mayfield knows these guys. You got Evans. You got these guys. Todd Bowles is the defense. Same defense. Same. So they're solid. They're just solid. Don't be making mistakes. Don't get penalties and just play physical and getting out fast though. They were all saying exactly what you said. They all said that. That was huge. They need that. You can't be down by a lot. So I agree with you, James.
Yeah, I think we're going to look back at that Broncos game as being the outlier, right?
I hope you're
That
right.
wasn't the way the Buccaneers want to play football in any facet, in any of the three phases. And those games are going to happen, right? You're going to have just bad games for one reason or another. I think we're going to look back on that Broncos game and say, you know what? They were just off that week. And to Denver's credit, they have a really, really good defense. There's no doubt about it. Bo Nix is what Bo Nix is, and I'm sure he'll get better with more experience. But that defense is absolutely outstanding. You take a look at the Washington Commanders, who had the number 2 pick in the draft. That's one of the Bucs' most impressive wins this season. Commanders haven't lost since. So you take a look at some of these games, and it's like, you know what? The Washington game, the Detroit game, even though it wasn't high scoring and the offense wasn't great, the defense was outstanding. The Eagles game, the defense was outstanding, and the offense did their part. Those are more of who the Buccaneers are compared to that Broncos game. I started to think after Denver, it was probably somewhere in the middle of Washington and Denver. I think it's pretty much what we saw weeks 1, 2, and 4 is who the Bucs actually are. And they might even be better than you or I thought they were coming into the season.
No, they definitely are playing better. I'll tell you this though, and I like this. All these accolades to Baker Mayfield, and he said it again. He goes, we were 3-1 last year. Like he keeps bringing that up because if you get a clunker here, you're going to have another loss within these next couple of games. Okay. Don't go in the tailspin. Don't go 4-7. It's very hard to pull out of that all the time. So I think Baker is telling that, and he's telling it because he's getting a lot of accolades. Look at the GOAT. LFG got the award, man, and he was out there. Liam Cohen went over and he's like, I got to meet him when I was a kid. I wore number 12. I was a quarterback. I'm from the New England area. He didn't remember me and all this. And he was, and here's the GOAT watching that and saying, look how good you are. So they're feeling really good, but also keeping it down, and I think that's what Baker Mayfield is doing, and I think that's the right thing. So you're right. Defense is very, very good. Offense is good, solid, not great. Baker's good, playing really good. Don't get that cockiness. That's my big thing. So I like that. That Baker keeps bringing that up. We were 3-1 last year. Come out, we got to play hard every game. Jordan Whitehead was saying that. I said, what was the difference? He goes, we came out. We realized you can't just go out. They did. They thought they were just going to beat the Broncos, and it doesn't happen like that in the NFL, James.
Nope, not at all. Well, Rock, that is going to do it for this week. Again, make sure all of you are checking out all the content and shows available right here at the813.tv. Follow on Twitter at the813TV, at Yarcho_Bucks, at Real Rock Riley. Make sure that you're subscribed to the YouTube channel, and we want to thank you for taking a trip with us inside the 813.